and welcome to the Biz Coach Show, hosted by my Biz Coaches and presented by the TLG Group. Our show is focused on giving entrepreneurs the edge they need to succeed. Your hosts today, as always, are David Macon, that's me, and Eric Whitmore. Eric, how are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent, David. Thank you.
Awesome. Glad to hear it. Well, I know we've got a pretty good show planned today, and we appreciate everybody who's joined us. Before we jump into our content for today, just take a minute, make sure you guys subscribe so you don't miss future shows. We would appreciate it, and we want to connect with you and make sure we're providing content that helps you and your business be more successful. So our topic for today is all about automating your business, and we're going to dive right in. Eric, I've got a question for you. I know you and your coaches deal with a lot of clients every single month. How often do you interact with a client that hasn't automated a single aspect of their business?
More often than I'd like to admit.
I thought that might be the case. You want to elaborate a little bit? Maybe tell us about the things that you see.
It's very common, and I'm sure that I've shared these statistics with you, whether or not I did it on the show. We did a program we were going through. One of the people had brought to our attention that they're currently the baby boomers, right, are all reaching retirement age. And it's approximately 9,700 people a day are reaching retirement age daily, right? 9,700 people a day. And that will continue until 2028. So for another 5 years or so. During that period of time, approximately 30% of all those people are small business owners. Now, people reaching retirement age and at small business owners, you take those two and you combine them, doesn't speak to a lot of tech.
Right.
And generally speaking, a lot of those people, because they're they're reaching that point where they're considering exiting, right, possibly selling the business, closing it down, whatever the right strategy is for them, they're looking at those options. And as they are, one of the things they're not thinking about doing as they get to the end of that is they're not thinking about upgrading or, including new technology, services, solutions, things like that. And it's only really been in the last 5 years that many of the automation solutions have been cost effective for the small business owner.
Yeah.
Maybe the mid-size and the larger companies, but the small business owner, really, it's only been the last 5 years where a lot of the automation solutions have been become cost effective. So that said, many of them have not considered it, or if they are, there's somebody within the organization that's kind of taken the lead and owned it. So that it's a smaller percentage of those businesses have actually done that. And even then, I won't say they've done it begrudgingly, but they've done it and said, well, we'll do this much, but I don't want to do too much at one time. And so consequently, we see a little bit, but not a ton. And the vast majority of them would dramatically improve productivity and a number of other things if they were looking at it. They just they're slow to adopt. And much like we talked about in the last episode when it came to AI, it's also a point of they're not comfortable.
Yeah.
Right. We talk about this all the time, in training and develop people. A confused mind doesn't move forward. So when they're not sure what to do, they don't do anything. And that's often what we as coaches find the challenge. So we have to come along side by side with them and help them understand how to implement these technology solutions, and so they can benefit from the automation that's available for their business.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I don't know how much you see this with the clients you work with, but oftentimes when I'm interacting with somebody, one of the reasons people are reluctant is, hey, whatever I've been doing has got me to where I am. So there, obviously it's successful in some regard, and if I change it, I don't know if it's going to be better or worse, but I'm going to assume it's going to be worse, and so I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. And it's interesting. I was talking to somebody, I think it was a couple of days ago, maybe a week or two ago, and they were doing all of the marketing follow-up. So when they would reach out to a client, the emails that we all get, they were doing those, one-on-one. So copying and pasting from a template and sending and then tracking when they sent it. Yeah, and I was, there's like 1,000 software applications out there that could do that in a fraction of the time, do it a lot more efficiently, copy and paste, really good ad copy and things like that. And it was just something that, this is just how I've always done it. And it kind of blew my mind. But I think we can all get in a rut like that whether it's, marketing or ops or anything, just, hey, this is how we do it. And I've got, my printed form, or I've got a clipboard, or, whatever it is. And there's ways that we can definitely modernize. So I think that's a big thing. How often do you see that with your clients? Just, hey, this is the way we've always done it, or, I inherited my father's business and that's the way he did it, or, that's how our grandpa did it. I mean, do you see that when you're working with your clients too?
All the time. All the time. And it's, I mean, if you think about it from a business owner's perspective, one of their biggest challenges is spending time between working on their business versus working in their business.
Yeah.
And, working in the business, doing the day-to-day, if they play a sales function, if they play a facilitation function, if they play a productivity function, ensuring that certain things get done, tasks, whatever. The issue is that they're so focused on that role, that job, I'll call it, within the business, that they don't have enough time to step back and look objectively. And the other thing I would suggest that a lot of people, small business owners that get into whatever business they're doing, and you can remember, small business, we say, people assume it's a 1 or 2 person job or business. It could be a 20, 30 employees. That's still technically a small business.
Right.
Doing a couple million a year, that's still relatively small, comparatively speaking. And the challenge is that to your point, they grew to that size and scale without some of these newfangled technology things. That's often what I would hear from somebody. And the reality is that they're so comfortable in the way that they do it, right, that they can't step back and say, how could this be more productive? Because what they were good at was the task. Like in our business, in our coaching business, it's predominantly their service-based businesses. So, they got into because they had a good skill set in that particular service-based business, right? Or a manufacturing business, something like that. And they're so ingrained in what it takes to do that right, that they don't understand that they need to step back and look at the business objectively to be able to really kind of assess and say, hey, could we do this more efficiently? What would it look like if we could do it more efficiently? So that's absolutely. It's funny is there's a phrase that I learned from Anthony Robbins, which was he would often challenge somebody who was kind of set in their dogmatic and their what they believed, and he'd say, "Look, I understand it's probably not reasonable to assume that we could do this, but if we could, what might that look like, right? Yeah. How might you do it? What steps would you have to take to make that happen?" And consequently, it's just enough of a mind shift pivot that they're kind of like, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, okay, if we did that, it might look like this. And I get them to pivot their thinking, but it's not easy.
No, not at all. Well, and I think one of the things that I find that helps, people kind of open up their mind to it is just by looking at, hey, what happens a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road if you don't automate? And so what are some of the things that maybe you look at, or when you're talking to people, what do you view as, concerns or issues or challenges that a business is going to face, particularly a small business that's looking to scale, if they don't automate? What are some of those challenges that you see?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things, right off the top of my head, I think of a client who's got a law firm, right? And lots of employees. The way they've always done it is people would retype documents. It's, there's a lot of manual processes in place. And, immediately I look at that and I'm like, and this is a well-respected law firm in Los Angeles, and their particular category of business that they do, very unique, right? And it's they do well for themselves. The owners had the business for over 20 years, and the reality is, at the end of the day, if I had a law degree and I had those types of skill sets, and I don't mean specifically me, but somebody who's a law degree and that's and was specialized in that particular area of law. And implemented the business skills that I would encourage them to adapt, meaning the automations and some of the other pieces that you would incorporate. I could do the exact same amount of business with a third of the overhead.
Yeah. Right.
Just payroll alone with a third of the overhead and be as productive, if not even more productive. By the way, I could also be remote. I could be super efficient, which means I'm not carrying as big a lease 2 facilities. I don't have as much lease space required. I mean, there's so many different ways that I could improve that business model. Now, granted, you have a legacy structure on a 20-year business, but the reality is that it would require some pivot, right? And you'd have to take some sensitivity so you don't lose clients. But the reality is, you take the same business model, fast forward it 3 years from now, 5 years from now, and I don't know how the original owner could keep up.
Yeah.
I don't see it being feasible. There's just too many efficiencies that would be picked up. The challenge in the short term, and you referenced it earlier, is one is dogmatic thinking, but then two, there's a cost, right, to put some of that equipment into place. So that's another consideration you have to factor in. But the reality is, between bearing that cost and having the patience of working through that, I mean, that's probably a good 6, maybe even a year's worth of adjustment to work through those types of things. But during that period of time, you'd have a huge impact in the business long term. You'd probably target different employees. People are more tech savvy, more adaptable to tech. And with that, then that would change some structurally, right? Culturally, you have to have a different perspective. But you consider all those things. I'm telling you, the business with the mind to automation and technology is going to blow the doors off the other business in the long term, right? And now, had that been 5 years ago, I'm not sure it's quite the same. 10 years ago, it's not even close to being the same. But that same person 10 years ago, beginning to adapt the technology, would have adapted it faster, implemented it sooner, been more aware of the technology as it presented itself, and consequently would be light years ahead of the legacy business owner.
Yeah. Well, I know a number of times we've talked about the exponential growth of technology. So it's an interesting point that it may not have been as big a deal 10 years ago, but because technology is changing faster, if your competition's adopting, you're just going to get run over that much faster, right? So
That's right.
It's interesting because if you don't do it now, you're at an immediate disadvantage, but the gap of that disadvantage against your competitor increases exponentially with the technology and with time. And so it's one of those kind of pressing things that if you don't do it now, and there are some, very affordable solutions to get started with a lot of these things to at least begin that process, and then you can refine and adapt and, move to, bigger and better things. But if you don't start now, that gap is already widening. So I think that's
absolutely
important to think about.
Yeah, and just as a quick note, I mean, it could start with something as simple as using a Calendly application,
right?
As opposed to being dogmatic and sticking with the idea of I need to have an assistant who answers the phone. Not answers the phone, but schedules my appointments.
Yeah. Well,
right.
Yeah, and we've done our fair share of work with, service-based businesses respectively. And what's one of the biggest issues is if I'm, a solopreneur or I've got a very small company, every time I'm on a job doing work and I can't answer a phone call to potentially schedule a new client, that's a missed opportunity. And so to your point, I go to websites and I'm not a web designer by any stretch. So, full disclosure, but I look at, some of these websites and I'm thinking, man, how easy would it be to just add a quick page that's, schedule a quote, schedule an estimate. And now you've automated that whole intake process. And not only is it saving you time, so you can do, be more focused on the work you're doing with the client you're with, but also, you're going to be getting more business because it's not limited by your availability. That's just one really small example, but very common, at least from what I see. I'm not sure if you see the same.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll give you a quick example that a law firm I referenced earlier. Day one, I sit down with them. Week one, I sat down. I flew to LA, sat down, went through the my onboarding process that I would go through, and through the assessment. Literally, I was sitting with I remember her exact role. She kind of a jack of all trades, but she was the one taking the inbound calls, right? And receptionist, I guess, would be the best. She definitely did more than that, but that was a role that she held. And they had just put a phone system in, computerized phone system that was supposed to be routing calls to different desks and things like that. But what was happening is everybody was coming in, she's distributing them, whereas the automation of the software of the phone system would do that for you automatically, and they weren't utilizing it. So miss one. Then I sit there and I watch her in a 90-minute session of me asking her a series of questions to understand how I could help her become more efficient. During that conversation, she must have taken, I'm going to say conservatively, 20 phone calls. And of the 20 phone calls, 18 of them were to make a payment over the phone.
Wow.
Either a monthly recurring payment or to make a payment for their initial appointment. Because in that business, one of the things that they've begun to do, because they have so many people flake and not show for the appointment, they take an initial payment, I think like $100 just to reserve your appointment. So between that and people that were doing a recurring monthly payment, once this payment structure had been developed, they were making the payment. So, I mean, think about it, 18 phone calls, 3 to 5 minutes per phone call.
Yeah. A lot of ways.
How much engagement did I really have with her over 90 minutes? Right.
Yeah.
It was maddening watching it play out, because I'm like, wow, there's so much opportunity here. And so we immediately implemented a payment process. By the way, they had a software system that had a payment processing system that could be automated. And they're like, yeah, but our client base isn't familiar with it. I'm like, yes, you're going to have to teach them and train them, but you will save yourself ungodly amounts of hours.
Yeah.
Payroll hours, right? Once you resolve it. So there is a period of time, like I said before, an adjustment period, but you're talking like weeks and months as opposed to tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars theoretically over time.
Yeah. Well, and we haven't even got into it, but the client experience with that too, right? I think about, I've got a dentist that does all of their paperwork digitally, and I've got a chiropractor that does it all, paper-based. And the experience between those two interactions is completely different. When you go, new client intake, I had to switch dentist recently. Long story, won't get into here. But at the new dentist office, before your first appointment, they text you a link, you fill it out online, you show up, they grab a copy of your insurance card, and you're done. I mean, it's so much smoother, easier, simpler. You can do it, electronically. You can, have all the information. So just trying to scramble, and you're sitting there with the clipboard and the pen doesn't work, right? That whole thing, it's a much better experience. Similarly, right? You probably have a fair amount of those people that want to make that initial payment before their, visit at the law firm, that would be glad to go click a link, pay online, or have, a card on file or whatever, depending on the billing situation. But it's a much better experience than having to wait on hold and then, wait for somebody to get freed up, do the payment. I mean, we're creating negative customer experiences by not automating as well. And sometimes we don't think about that. We need to think about it from the customer perspective.
Right. I'll go one step further. I get regular massages, right? Over the years, being an athlete, I got bumps and bruises, aches and pains, and I get regular massages. And I won't work with a massage therapist that I can't do automated scheduling with.
Yeah.
I just go into their calendar, I find out when the available day and time is, and I select it based on my schedule. To call in when they're available, if they're even a one-person operation massage therapist that works from like a co-working facility or something like that, how are they going to have anybody? They can't afford to have somebody answer the phone for them. So what's the next best way to do that? And if I got to wait for them to be out of session to answer the phone to schedule an appointment, how far is that going to go?
Right.
Yeah, there's so many opportunities. We go on for hours, literally, just with simple examples of that. And to your point, going back to the medical experience, whether it's a hospital or a doctor's office or a dentist's office or anybody who requires you to fill out the HIPAA documents, I could tell you personally, my handwriting sucks.
Yeah, right.
And worse than that, as my arthritis has gotten worse, I write even worse. I don't even know how the girls behind the desk that are working in that role can actually read my handwriting.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, they must be phenomenal at hieroglyphics or something like that. I would, and so for both people, for me and for them, I would feel better that I get to type it up while I'm, at home and then submit it so that they have it.
Yeah. Well, and then there's the incremental time saving, right? Because there's always the, dentist every 6 months, you're going back in, right? Or if you got cavities, like I just found out my last appointment, so that's a bummer. But but every 6 months. So now, right now that you already have it, it's electronic. Now they can send it to you and say, hey, before you come in, just double check that it's all current, right? And so now we're saving time instead of filling it out new every time you go to the office. Again, creating a better experience. So yeah, very true. Very true. It's funny. I was just thinking about your massage example. So if she did 5 90-minute massages a day, let's just put that out there. That means she's only got about 30 minutes or so in an 8-hour day to handle scheduling and new clients. I mean, if you put that in perspective, how little time that massage therapist has to grow their business is minimal. Going back to your point about thinking strategically and working on your business, you've already missed out on several opportunities. And over time, if I can't get a hold of you and I can't schedule, I'm going to find somebody else, right? And I think that's true for most people. So
yeah,
missed
absolutely.
opportunities.
And that's a huge problem in the service-based industry. If you don't figure out how to be more efficient and more organized, you're not going to sustain, because if somebody else is going to be disciplined and organized and systematic, and to your point, the business will flow where there's the least amount of obstruction.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Cool. Okay. Well, we've talked a bit about some of the disadvantages of failing to automate. Any other advantages of automating that we haven't talked about that you think would be noteworthy for our listeners?
If you're moving from disadvantage to full advantage, I mean, I think there's a huge cost savings after the initial transition, right? So you have to be able. I think that's anything where you're adopting something new. There's a phase that you go through, right? There's a duplication phase. You're switching softwares, you're switching whatever, right? You're doing what you're doing today, you upgrade to a better solution. There's some period of time that you have to duplicate. So there's a cost initiation. There's also, like I said before, it's the mental anguish, for lack of a better term, right? Of working through that process. But, overall, outside of, you got cost savings, you got efficiencies, you got, just general better, I don't say attitude, but people, it seems to me when I go into those environments, it's more streamlined, it's more efficient. I have a better experience. The employees have a better experience. The facilitator has a better experience, whether it's a doctor, lawyer, whatever, right? And anybody in those environments, if you're we're talking about office or branch type of operations, think about somebody who works in the field, right? Landscaper, painter, plumber, right? Everything's digital. I'm not carrying around a clipboard and a pen. I don't care if my pen doesn't work. I've literally got, certain technology can do the same thing to you in some cases, but you've got an app on your phone, and I pull up the app and here's the document. You just need you to sign here, pop my credit card into the bottom of it. Boom, the payment processes, transfers funds immediately. 24 hours later, it's in my bank account. As an independent contractor working out in the field like that, everything's populated. If you have a good back-end software, now all that information is being fed back into my accounting software. If I'm using like QuickBooks Online or some other software solution like that, it's tracking all my sales. I can actually figure out I can go back now and I can research data, and I can figure out where my clients are, what my clients are, the aggregation of my clients is predominantly in a certain part of the valley or whatever the case may be. All this data is super, super valuable for me if I take the time to go back and analyze my business. And, right. I say it all the time, every time we're on the show, but if you have a coach that will challenge you to do that, even once a month or even once a quarter, to review that data, once the data is captured electronically, you can massage it in so many different ways. And now you can look at it and say, okay, well, this particular area of town really is not beneficial to me. It takes me a while to get there. There's the drive time, there's the client base, whatever, right? And so you may look at that and say it just doesn't make sense based on where my business is located. And for instance, I've probably used this reference before, but think about a landscaper, right? A landscaper that is super efficient and knows exactly what their territory is and stays within the same 5-mile radius. How much more savings do they have on their business if they're literally driving down the street? This house, skip 3 houses, next house, as opposed to do this house, then drive 3 streets over, then drive 5 streets up, and then drive 1.5 miles to the next day. I don't know that it's that bad, but you get the idea. And quite honestly, how much time is wasted. You're paying for payroll that whole time. Yeah. You're paying for gas to drive around. But if you could be as disciplined and efficient as just being able to drive through literally a neighborhood to pick up the 10, 12, 15 places you go to in a particular day, There's so many different ways, and that's got to be, I know for a fact, having been able to get some businesses like that makes a huge difference in just the way that you approach your business every day.
Yeah. Well, and I think everything you said 100% spot on. And I think one of the aspects that we don't think about, kind of bringing it back to the client or customer experience, but taking it one step further, is the perception of your business. I mean, if you think about it, right, if you're looking, for, let's use the landscaper example, if you go to the website and it's got, a really clean, modern look, and then they've got an automated scheduling tool and an intake process where you give your information and, what you're looking to have done. And is it, weekly maintenance, monthly maintenance, one-time yard cleanup, right? You do all that. Then they show up and, they're well dressed and everything's documented with photos, and they upload you a link of the before and after, which some services do. And then, they take the payment, it's already on file, and then it's automatic after that. And you don't have to think about it, and it just happens, and it's a seamless process. And you contrast that against somebody who doesn't have a good website, maybe no website at all. It's a Facebook page, right? I see that all the time, drives me nuts.
Yep.
They show up, everything's kind of disheveled. The billing process is you got to be home to pay them cash, or you got to, mail them a check, and that takes forever.
Or leave the check in the drawer in the cabinet behind the house or something.
Yeah, exactly. And then, you're kind of like, when did they come? When did they go? Did they get everything? And there's no, photos, and it's just, it creates a really clunky experience. And so if you think about, who am I going to want to continue to do business with? Who am I going to recommend, neighbors and friends and family to? It's the person that has their operations together and has this smooth, streamlined process. But you can't get there unless you automate. So that's one big thing that I think we got to think about. And I think the other, you kind of alluded to it earlier, but when you talk to people, especially in an organization where maybe they're, the bottom rung of the ladder, so to speak, and they get a lot of the jobs that nobody else wants to do, whether it's, data entry or whatever, that person, the morale in that work group or that individual is really low. And usually you're going to have a high turnover position. But if you can automate some of those, more mundane tasks and free that person up to work on other things that bring more value to your business, not only are you going to retain that person longer, you're going to have them focusing their effort on revenue generating activities, and that's going to help your bottom line. So
totally,
I think that perception, that morale, those are two other factors that people don't tend to think about.
Yeah, no, and a matter of fact, as you hit the morale piece, I mean, that's ironically, I think you and I even discussed it might have been Lloyd, but we discussed the CEO from Microsoft. I can't remember the name, but the new CEO of Microsoft was actually, it was at a symposium and was talking about the impact. Again, we'll go back to AI as a reference point, but the automations systems, more and more people will be able to develop a skill set that they've never had before. Just online learning, right? Just online learning in and of itself. And consequently, people who were doing the entry level roles, to your point specifically, right, doing the mundane tasks, can be automating those, makes all of that go away. And now all of a sudden people can elevate their skill set a rung or two, right? And so now they're doing more fulfilling work. They don't feel like they're stuck doing the crap that nobody else wants to do, for lack of a better term. And quite honestly, at the end of the day, they feel more valued, to your point. And now I'm motivated and I'm excited to be at my job, and I feel like I'm contributing in a better way, in a bigger way.
Yeah, absolutely. No, he's spot on. And I mean, a couple episodes ago, we were talking about the importance of retention and even generationally, people more so now than ever are looking for work that has meaning and fulfillment. I mean, we need to do a whole episode on Gen Z, and I know we've talked about it. It'll be coming soon, but that's why you should subscribe so you don't miss it. But more than anything, it's like, people just walk away from a job if it's not meaningful, fulfilling, if they're not developed. I mean, it's unlike any other time in history. And so I think even more reason to make sure your employees feel like the work they do matters. So very well said.
Agreed.
One other thing, Eric, I'd love to get your perspective on this too, is I think about, an entrepreneur that's listening to this. One of the things that takes a lot of time, is super frustrating, at least for me, and hopefully others can relate to this, is when I have to constantly pull information, pull data, versus having it pushed. And I think that's one of the really large benefits of automation is if I can have, my appointments for that day, or if I can have invoices that are outstanding or whatever, have that pushed to me. So when I wake up and I'm doing my routine, I can look and have kind of a dashboard of where's my business at today? What are my priorities for today? And have all that stuff automatically pushed to me. Makes it so much easier for me to understand what's important in that day, even hour to hour, but also, really feel like I've got a good handle on my business. And I think that push versus pull is something people don't necessarily think about. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have some grading thoughts. There was nothing more frustrating in previous roles when somebody in the ops team would say to the sales group, obviously, my background is more in sales, but I'm very familiar with the operations, having done accounting and played in the backside of the house. But nothing more frustrating than somebody in the ops team saying, "Oh yeah, just go here and pull this report."
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm like, all right, I'm not on the cutting edge of technology, but I do happen to know that it's really simple to automate this reporting process.
Yeah.
So that it initiates and automates and kicks out an email to me.
Right.
It just a simple email with the report that I'm looking for, which we already have. We pull it up. You just told me I could pull it up. We can create a process where it initiates on a daily basis that email based on previous day's performance and the month-to-date performance.
Yeah.
Why do I have to go into a document and pull a report when I can just have it put in front of me, to your point, with the key in a format that I can clearly identify the key business points that I need to reference and acknowledge my, what we call the 7 to 12 key metrics that I should be measuring. And we say 7 to 12 because every business is slightly different, but generally speaking, you can between 7 and 12 key metrics that you should be measuring every day. And they're not necessarily financial metrics. They could be a revenue capture metric, but it's not necessarily a financial metric. So it's not my P&L. It's literally my daily numbers, so that if I can look at that, I can look at what I did yesterday. I can see quickly what I've done in the last week. I can see what I've done month to date and what that is projecting to do. Yeah. That's everything I need to know to make decisions on what I should be doing today, to your point earlier, right? Yeah. I now have I have what's important to me now, right? I can quickly identify what those things are. Yes, it takes a little bit of work to pull those 7 to 12 key metrics. It takes a little due diligence to understand what it is. Sometimes you start with one metric and you realize, well, this is an important metric. However, this metric is a leading indicator of that metric. Yeah. Right. So this is the metric I should be tracking every day. This metric is important, but what I really need to know is this metric, right? And those that takes a little bit of time, maybe a few weeks to a month, 2 or 3 months tops, to really kind of identify what those metrics are. Assuming that the owner knows their business well, a good coach can come in and say, okay, you're telling me this is your output, right? What are the things that lead into that we could measure every day? Yeah. Right. And using that data now, we can actually use that to extrapolate out and be able to project out what your month is going to look like. And if you have a general idea what hard costs are and your variable cost percentage, then we know if you're going to make money by halfway through the month. Right. We don't need the accountant to come back 10 days after the close of the month to tell you that you lost $3,000 or made $5,000. Right. Yeah. So, huge piece. And the whole fact that the whole idea that data can be pushed to you as opposed to having to go and pull it. Everybody's inundated with poop to do. Yeah. Right? That you're just constantly inundated with things you have to do. And then there's things you should do. Yeah. Right? We can get on an entire tangent about the efficiency quadrant, the Eisenhower matrix, right? Oh yeah. Yep, what's important but not urgent but not important, right? Yeah, we could spend an hour on that, right? But the reality is everybody's inundated with things they have to do, and then there's things they should do. And what generally happens is the stuff that's in front of us that we have to do right now, but it's not necessarily improving our business. It's just getting us from point A to B when we need to be strategically thinking how to get to D, E, and F, right? Yeah. So that's a big piece. And the whole idea of pushing, right, versus pulling, it just makes it easier for us to identify those things quickly and move forward, make better intelligent decisions. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting too, right? So I was just thinking about this, and I don't know why. There must be somebody who's going to listen to this that is thinking this way. But well, hey, I'm not the person that runs the reports, and the people that run them, they email them to me. So I am getting it pushed to me either way. But if you think about that, right? If you've got a couple different employees, maybe work groups, however your business is structured, if you've got 3 reports from finance, you've got 2 reports from ops, you've got 2 reports from the sales team. Now you've got to look at all these different data sources. They're all coming in at different times, right? And then you got to compare them together. It's not easy to be strategic in that environment. Not alone, every one of those people, they've got different skill sets. In my experience, not to pick on the sales guy, but usually the sales guy, not the best at getting reports done on time. Financial guy, I'm like, I don't even know what I'm looking at. Can you break this down for me? And why there are 400 metrics on one spreadsheet, right? So, it's getting the data exactly the way you want it. Then you free up every one of those people. So if you lose one of those people, that was, the go-to, gal or guy that ran that report, that person's gone. You don't have a blind spot in your business.
Right.
It's all done for you. And again, they can focus on more important things. So
right.
I think that's super important. And there's a lot of, great data visualization tools and things that combine reporting. Like it's pretty awesome BI tools out there. And I was just going to say one final thing on that before we move on is it pains me to say it. I know it's going to pain you, Eric, because we're kind of spreadsheet nerds. We know our Excel, our VLOOKUPs, our macros. I mean, we can hold our own in some Excel. It's dying. I mean, that skill set is going to go away as more and more things get connected, as we move to BI, as AI comes in, right? There's so many different platforms that are coming out that are going to get us out of spreadsheets. And so if you're still managing your business by spreadsheets, your appointments off of spreadsheets, you're going to be left in the dust in as little as 3 to 5 years. I would predict. So I don't know. You may feel different, Eric. I know you're a big spreadsheet guy, so I don't want to hurt any feelings, but any thoughts on that?
No, you're dead on. I mean, quite honestly, as you were saying, hey, I'm the, I do this and then some other department aggregates these data points, right? The finance team does theirs, the sales team provides theirs, or at least, and actually you don't want the sales team providing their own data because that's never good anyway. Right?
We've seen that happen. Yeah.
Not that I know anything about that at all. Right. And then you have another set of metrics, operational productivity metrics, right? And it's like in our world, in the retail world, it was door counts, right? We had an automated system that calculated the door counts per location every day within the days that the operation was open, and then uploaded it to your point, a business. It was a BI business intelligence software application that fed in our sales data. It fed in our finance data. It fed in our payroll data, like how many people were in the store yesterday and how many hours they worked, and we could actually calculate the not necessarily the actual payroll dollars, but we calculated the number of hours that were worked, and we could measure that against the productivity, the sales numbers, and the revenue generated. And we had a dollar amount per hour worked. And with that number, we could determine whether or not we were profitable on the day.
Right.
Now, and that's not ridiculously advanced. I mean, we were probably near that by year 4 or 5, I want to say. We certainly refined it between years 5 and 10. The last, I would say we probably didn't do much to change the reporting structures and things like that, probably the last 3 to 5 years. But I would say between 1 and 3, we were living in the spreadsheet world.
Yeah.
And then for years 3 and 4, we probably still live in the spreadsheet world in like 2/3 of the business because we had that transition. But then the next 4 or 5 years was just constantly refining, right? And every time we updated something or every time we implemented something different, it just improved the data set. And so, like I said, it's an iterative process. It takes time to pull it all together. But to my point earlier, if you don't start now, it won't happen.
Yeah.
And to go from A to Z like overnight, that's just impossible. It doesn't happen. And then it's adaptation, right? Because everything you introduce, that's one thing. Getting everybody to adapt it and actually do what they're supposed to do to make all these pieces work, that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
Now you're talking about leadership skill set.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of brings me to, I think, kind of the last question. Then I'd love to just walk through some of our key takeaways for today in our application. But we were talking about, how to run your existing business better today through automation. One of the things that we haven't touched on as much, we've kind of tiptoed around it a little bit, is maybe help us connect the dots between automation and scalability. So if somebody's looking to scale their business dramatically over the next 10 years, how does automation really help them do that?
Say that again?
How does automation really help somebody scale in a big way, meaningful way, right? Instead of incremental growth, how do you have that, massive exponential growth?
Right. Well, and scaling is, I mean, we also experienced that. I've done that in a couple of different companies and had some successes and had some setbacks. And scaling too quickly before you're ready for it can be a major problem too. And often, even with my trucking business, one of the opportunities we had was recognized. First and foremost, we recognized how antiquated the industry was. Predominantly the way that it worked, the way that it was managed, the way that most people manage their businesses. And I'm not talking about individual truck drivers. I'm talking about the way that the company approached the industry, their business and the industry as a whole. And most of that was legacy. Most of it was, this is the way it's been done, right? Kind of referencing back to your point earlier. Yep. So the challenge that I had coming in was I had a different perspective. I definitely had a different lens that I looked through, from a little bit of a technology background, knowing what was available out there. But when you're scaling, there's two things. One, again, I'll talk about adaptation, right? You got a concept, you got an idea that you think it's going to make an impact as far as automating certain key things of the business. If people weren't using them, it's a waste of money, right? So one of the things you have to look at as far as how it impacts scalability is the product or service, is the solution that you're incorporating, is it not just adaptable, is it easy to bring into the business, right? Will people be able to look at it and quickly ascertain, this is going to impact me, this is going to help me, this is how it's going to help me, and most importantly, this is why it's important for me to do what they're asking to do? Because I've seen people go out and make major investments in technology, roll it out to the team and say, this is what we're doing. And then 6 months later, they're still not doing any of it. A year later, they're still doing any of it. They're still paying for the software, and tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars later, they're super frustrated because it didn't go anywhere. So just paying into a software platform or some technology piece that should help you be more efficient doesn't necessarily mean it's going to help you scale. It could be counterintuitively tripping you up, right? Because there's a slow adaptation process. So you have to make sure that when you look at different tools like that, solutions like that, that they are in fact something that can be introduced to the team, and that you have the leadership group that can not just introduce with the vision, but also be there from an accountability perspective, because it does require some of that. There'll be certain people that'll jump right on it. There'll be another group of people that'll slowly come along, and then you'll have the people that just come kicking and screaming, right? And so that's a whole nother component. So, I wouldn't want to sell people on the idea that just rolling out new software solution or some kind of automation is going to immediately allow you to be able to scale, because there's a lot more that goes into. We're still humans engaging with technology, and there's as long as there's a human element, there's always an error, a margin of error. Yeah. But that said, diligently looking for what's the right types of technologies, because that again, scalability, you buy into a software technology today, you make investment, and then you realize, 2 years later that software is outdated, and it's going to require an update, and it's a significant update, and it's going to, require another adjustment period or something. So that's something you have to do your due diligence and make sure that all makes sense. But assuming all the things are right in place, and the ideas are founded well, right, then what it does, I mean, I can't stress enough the cost savings when it's done correctly. The cost savings in and of itself, you look at a good operating business today, a 20% net margin. I mean, in any scenario, venture capitalists today are looking for businesses in the mid-tier, mid-market range, they call it, and that's probably in the $5 to $20 million range as far as revenue, gross revenue. You're operating at 20% margin on $5 million, you're making $1 million in net profit. You might remember on a previous episode, I mentioned that only 3.2% of all businesses ever reach $1 million in gross sales. So a business that's actually $5 million and netting $1 million, that's a pretty substantial business. And I'm willing to pay a couple $1 million for that, because if that business will last me 10 years, I'll double my money. Right. And the idea is I'm acquiring it with the intent that I can put even more efficiencies in place to make that $1.5 million and consequently push that up even higher. But to be able to get to a 20% net margin with a payroll laden business or heavy with employee costs, that's going to be super difficult unless you can find a way to automate a lot of the other processes and systems that are in. So that's a big factor. Anything that has a large cost of goods sold, obviously managing that on a consistent basis and then be competitive with what's out in the industry, depending on what product or service you're selling. That's another thing you have to consider is, what's out there. So, but I know I might have skated around your question a little bit, but I think that there's a lot of things to factor in when it comes to scalability. But what I can tell you from my experience, you can't scale. You cannot effectively today. You cannot effectively scale a business the way that you could maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago without the appropriate software automations, technology automations. Those, without that today, you just can't be competitive and be able to scale. Think about the retail industry as a whole. When we saw the big retailers at the late 90s and early 2000s start falling by the wayside, companies that have been around 100 years, Sears, Montgomery Ward's, big retailers been around a long time, just drop off. I mean, legacy, like 100 years of legacy, just disappearing. And I wouldn't say overnight, right? We saw the writing on the wall in a lot of cases. Lots of the electronic industry. I mean, the only electronics company that really exists today anymore is Best Buy. And that was a world that you and I came from, right? You were Radio Shack, and I don't even know. I don't know that my kids even know what Radio Shack is, and they're only like in their 20s and 30s.
There's still a few out there, easy.
But I mean, when you think about it from that perspective, how much has changed just in the last 20 years?
Yeah.
Right. But retail as a whole, that's it's all gone online, right? It's automation, processes and systems. Look at Amazon, right? They've got massive warehouses that are run by robotics and automation. So they're kind of often on our channel, we talk about the big companies and the dollars they're investing in that type of technology. We, as a smaller business, need to look at that and recognize that's where it'll all go, right? They don't make hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in investment in that type of technology. And unless that's where they're going, because they have the money to invest and see where things are going. What we need to do is look and see how that adapts to our business and then apply it accordingly.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on and really brought up some good points about, don't automate just for the sake of automation. It's not a one and done. So I think really some good points on that. I think for me, where my mind goes is you need to squeeze every ounce of efficiency out of your business to scale, effectively, right? So once you kind of figure out where those efficiencies are and really minimize where you're losing time, where you're spending unnecessary capital that could be used to fuel your growth, then the path forward, I think, becomes a lot more clear. But I also think, to your point, really spending time thinking about, everybody's role, and within each role, what is the work that only a human can do? And then what are the skills that best support that work? And then look for the best people at those skills, right? Because sometimes we keep people because maybe they have an ancillary skill that's not really, a big part of their job, but man, I can't afford to lose this because they also do this other thing. But if you can automate, that, let's say reporting, right? Well, he's not a great salesperson, but he's the only one that does the sales report. So I guess we got to keep him around because we need the visibility, right? Or, they're horrible to deal with, but they're the only person that can, pull a P&L for us versus be able to go into QuickBooks and, generate one with 2 clicks of a button, right? So it's those kind of things that, when you figure out You take all the excess away, all the waste, and you have, whatever's left, whatever that human element is, and what are the skills that are best suited for that role. That helps you with your hiring, that helps you with your talent development, which is, of course, getting into my space a little bit here. But I think that's the key thing. And you may find we have whole roles within our business that we don't really need if we were to automate, right? Not that I'm, trying to axe people and lead to more mass layoffs, which we've talked about on this show, but I think that's important, right? And maybe we can pivot those people in other areas of the business, but we don't know unless you go through the work, look at what's out there, assess different solutions, and really kind of study each of the roles within your business and find those opportunities for efficiency. And once you're there and you've squeezed every ounce of efficiency out, now you can better forecast what it's going to take to grow your business.
Absolutely. And that was a piece I was going to add to that when you talk about scaling. And again, I referenced this before, but when you look at scaling, one of the things you have to do is be able to project out. You can't know when we're going to have an economic downturn.
Right.
But if you have enough margins built into your business model, you're going to be able to absorb an economic downturn. Right. You can't know that we're going to have, a massive walkout on jobs.
Right.
Nobody could have projected that. I would say nobody. I would say likely most people wouldn't be able to project that. Certainly most small business owners wouldn't be able to. However, we're all dealing with it currently. Right. I mean, people want $5, $6, $7, $8 an hour more than they were getting for the same job 5 years ago. And when you talk about the minimum wage was $7 an hour 10 years ago, 8 years ago, whatever it was. And now, it's being double that in most places. And even worse yet, on top of that is as you project out beyond, what does that look like 5 years from now with the advent of more technology coming and at a rapid pace? You mentioned the acceleration of the technology adaptation. What does that do to the compensation rates, right? What now people are going to want $20 an hour, $25 an hour to do a job that they did 5 years ago for $8 an hour. That's a triple on payroll. If we can't figure out a way to buffer it changes the entire business model. I mean, your quick service restaurants, they can't compete. They can't stay open. There's no way.
Right. Yeah.
Right. They'd have to triple sales to be able to support a triple in payroll because they're not operating at a 30% profit margin in those quick service restaurants. They're operating at 10, maybe 12 if they're good, 8 more likely. So that's not a lot of margin for error.
Yeah. Well,
which we saw play out.
Apparently McDonald's has thought about that because now they have the fully automated McDonald's with the robots and all
exactly.
that. So they're thinking automation, right? And I think you're seeing, of course, big companies doing it, but more and more small companies doing it as it becomes affordable.
Well, and that's my point earlier, right? If the bigger companies doing that, we have to look at that and say, okay, that may not be our reality today, but it will be our reality in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
And the irony that I would add to that would be, look at what we saw transpire in 20 years in the wireless industry. If I go back to my early years, the mid 90s to the mid 2017, which is when we left Express, you look at that period of time, right? It's approximately 20 years. What was being sold, as a wireless product in those days was actually a pager. And a few people could afford a cell phone, right? And I remember that it was only 5 years later that the coolest thing that a phone could do at that time was play the game Snake on a monochrome screen, right? So now you take that, and that took 5 years to evolve to that point.
Yep.
And look at what it's doing now, 15 years later, not even 15. It was probably 10 years later, the technology, and they're continuing to evolve and increase the speed. And now you're walking around with a computer in your pocket, right? This is game changing. And now they've got folding screens. So now I've got a phone this size. When I open it up, it's a mini tablet, right? That you look at the enhancement of technology, we can apply this in every part of our businesses. We just have to be willing to look for it. That's probably the biggest thing that I find that dare I say, frustrating when I talk to business owners and help them understand. I'm like, there's solutions. We're just not looking at them the right way, right? That just requires some out of the box thinking and being creative. And that's where, like I said, objective perspective, somebody can come in and give you a different perspective on what you've been doing, what you've been really good at for 10 years. Let me show you how to make it even better. That's kind of the perspective we try and share with our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. So well said. Well, let's jump to just a couple of key takeaways, and we've kind of discussed a lot of these, but I thought it'd be good just to kind of break down. There's really 5 main areas where automation can be tremendously helpful, and the first is kind of in the aspect of your business's finances. So things like accounting software, bookkeeping, invoicing. So that's a really big area. The second is marketing. So, whether it's social media, scheduling your campaigns, analytics, right? All of that, that's an aspect of automation. So depending on, what you're struggling with, if growing, your sales pipeline, things like that is important, there's a lot of automated marketing tools that are out there. Also operations. So project management software, inventory management software, all of that is going to help you out a ton, right? Depending on your business. They're really the last two, sales. So whether that's a CRM tool, a client intake, and oftentimes these work together, and I'll talk about that in a second, but client intake, or you talked about earlier, Eric, just the data on your customers, where do they live? What are some common attributes about them? They're in the same zip code. So that can be really helpful. That's all aspects of sales automation. And then human resources, right? So things like timekeeping, recruiting, right? Things that process can take a really long time. It can take 30, 60 days to start to finish to onboard somebody in a business, depending on how, paper versus electronic and all those other things. So HR, that function can be automated a lot. And so just kind of want to touch on those, just kind of get people thinking about different ways they can automate financial, marketing, ops, sales, and HR. So any thoughts on any of those that you want to dive into, Eric, before we jump to our apply it for the show?
Yeah, I'll probably just acknowledge that I probably did a disservice to my marketing clients out there, my marketing agency clients, because we didn't really talk about that, and that's a huge impact in that business and that industry as a whole, right? Again, we talked about AI last week. This continues to be an impact, as well as just general automations. You referenced the calendar function. It's any of those components that were used to integrate to help through that marketing process, right? Just, running my ads on Facebook or Google, right? And what does that process look like, and how automated you can make that? But more specifically, the data that you can extrapolate from that, right? You can gather more data about your clients as the transactions come in. When it comes to sales, to your point, following through your CRM, what that means when you can run a campaign to clients that you've already sold to in the past. There's so many different ways that all of these pieces play into business. Any one of them individually would have significant impacts to the business. The financial and accounting, I remember my early 20s, I had an ice cream distribution business, which you've probably heard me talk about my stories for years over the years. That business, I did quite well with it. What was interesting is that I also was at the time a professional kickster. So I would run the business during the day, go home, take a nap, change my clothes, go to the gym, and run my martial arts school. I was a part owner in that, and prepare for fights whenever I would had fights coming up. And so I was on the go all the time. And one of the biggest challenges I had was taking 4 hours to go through paperwork for a week's worth of business. Well, I was doing hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue, and I had to process all those documents and pay my bills and everything like that. And it was actually a cash intensive business. So I had a lot of cash. So I'd have to go to the bank and make deposits and then reconcile everything. I was just like, what a pain in the butt. And I think about that today. It could have all been automated, right? And a lot of business owners, and it's not just the accounting component of it, but it's then the reporting that you gather from it. So all of these resources, to your point, the HR components, right? All of these things being managed and automated and housed electronically, so you don't have so much paper, which is a whole nother thing we didn't even touch about, but just all the paper, right? The countless pages of documents that you have to store and maintain, all can be digitally maintained now, right? And so massive law firm, I'll go back again. Leasing 2 spaces to store all documents and maintain all the legal requirements of maintaining those types of documents, right? So leasing additional space just to store the documents.
Yeah.
Over 20 years of being in business, you got a lot of freaking files. And imagine if those are all digitally maintained and, the appropriate cybersecurity and everything else. How much money am I saving a month there, for storage space in LA?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Not cheap. Not cheap from what I hear.
No, exactly. Lucky for him, he owns the building, so he's leasing it to himself, but it's still a cost, right?
Yeah.
That's space that could be leased to somebody else and generating revenue for it.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. So cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's jump to just kind of, some thoughts on how entrepreneurs, small business owners, maybe even managers within small businesses that occasionally listen in, how they can apply this. So I think for me, one of the first things to do is identify bottlenecks and inefficiencies in your business. And if you don't already have a couple that come to mind, you probably need to spend a little bit more time thinking about your business, thinking about it strategically, really kind of scrutinize every aspect, scrutinize every role, interactions between departments, all that good stuff. And where are those bottlenecks? Where are those inefficiencies? And then for me, one of the things that I think is critical is just thinking about the things you hate doing or are not good at. And so kind of to throw an example in there, you talked about, the financial automation, sales automation. For me, what I do basically, if I'm not, interacting with clients, if I'm not marketing my business or, developing or delivering training, I'm losing money. Right. So for me, it took longer than it should have because I know better, but that's the importance of detaching from your business and thinking about it strategically, right? Is I had this epiphany of what am I doing, doing all these intake forms and I was, generating invoices kind of in a more manual way. I was having to follow up on the invoices. And so I want to say it was, I don't know, $20 a month, switched over to Honeybooks, which is just one of the many solutions out there, not sponsored, not endorsed in any way. Although if you're from Honeybooks and you're listening, we gladly take a sponsorship. But now they handle everything from client intake. I move clients through different stages that generates, certain tasks for me, for the client, everything stored in one spot. Invoicing is all done through there, collecting a deposit for, work to be done. It's all right there, super easy. And even follow up if people are, behind on their invoice. And so that's all stuff that I don't have to do. That saves me, I don't know how many hours a month that I can then focus on, the deliverables for my clients or generating new business or, following up on past clients and trying to get, follow business. Right. So that's just one aspect, but that started with, I hate doing these invoices. I hate following up and it's time consuming. And
Here.
It's not necessarily my forte. I mean, I didn't get into business to do that, right? I want to help people learn better. That's what I'm about. So that's just one example of thinking about your own business, thinking about how you're spending your time and what do you not like to do or what are you not particularly good at and how can we leverage automation to do that?
Good direction.
Yeah. So that's a big one. And then, really the next step is explore automation solutions and pricing. And so for everything, right, there's going to be a couple solutions. You kind of talked about this, Eric, is, there's some that are, maybe they've been around a while, but maybe they're not as future ready as some of the new stuff that's out there, maybe not as feature rich.
Right.
Maybe the pricing's really good. And then also looking at the pricing structure, how many licenses do you get or how many seats do you get? And what does that look like as you scale? Sometimes, oddly enough, the pricing increases as you scale. It should get cheaper, right? We're used to that traditional model, but that's not always the case based on the software you're using. And then one of the things that I recommend, Eric, I know you're better at networking than I am. I will admit it. But I think reaching out to your network, whether it's live or virtual, and just asking what other people use. They're going to have experiences with different software. And I tried this one, I hated it, or I like this one. It was really good for 2 years, and then we kind of outgrew it. And so getting that feedback can be helpful, apart from features and pricing, but actually kind of those use cases I think can be really helpful.
Absolutely.
And then kind of a couple other things. Trial offers, a lot of software, companies now, they'll give you 30 days or, 14 days. Use that trial, just get in, play with it, set aside time, remember to cancel the trial. Been burned on that one. But use those trials out, get a couple of people on your team, have them testing it, give feedback on it. And that can be really helpful too, because maybe you think it's awesome, but the people who are going to be using it every day think it's terrible. You need to get that feedback too. So include other people in your testing process.
Agreed.
And then kind of the last couple things here, make sure to scale with you. So you talked about that, Eric. And then also be thinking about there is an administrative component that comes with automation that people don't often think about. So that's, hey, when I hire somebody, I now have to set up their profile and I have to assign permissions. Then when people, change work groups, or I fire somebody or they quit, now I got to deactivate that. And there is an administrative process that goes with that. And certainly there's, single sign-on, Active Directory. I mean, you can get into some really techy stuff on that. But generally speaking, you have to have a plan for, okay, well, who's going to put the person in the automation? Who's going to set them up? Who's going to train them on it? Who's going to, teach them how to use it, right? All those sorts of things. So that's something we don't often think about that is important as well. And then the last thing, then I'll pause for any of your thoughts, Eric, too, is, you're putting a lot of data into these software applications. And so it's really important to think about how can you get your data out of it? So not only, is it secure? That's another aspect of it. But if you decide to go to a different software solution, what does it look like to try to get your data out of that platform, and how easily you migrate it somewhere else? So those are all things that you should be thinking about if you're looking to apply this. And Eric, I'll give you a few minutes to weigh in on anything else.
Yeah, no, as you hit the last one there, the exporting them, like that's actually a huge one. I've had clients that I've spoke to, and that was an issue, right? They went to switch platforms, and the data they wouldn't allow them, they wouldn't release the data. And I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? Yeah. And I'm like, and so we joke about, it's in sales, we joke about, you don't need to read the fine print. Read the fine print.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's I was totally aghast by that. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. They won't release. And the issue was that they had problem. The individual had a problem with his computer. That the software is on the computer. He had a problem with his computer. He ditched the computer, and for whatever reason, they canceled the account. He went to pivot and went to go and move the data, and like, no, you had it. It was on your computer and laptop, right? It's on a laptop, and yeah. So he couldn't retrieve the data. So he literally started from scratch. This is a chiropractor. Wow. Literally had to start the business from scratch. So all over again after being in the industry for many, many years, 10 years, 12 years, something like that. You're going through scraps of paper to who's this client, what's their phone number? I got to call them and schedule their appointment. It's like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, like literally starting from scratch. So,
wow.
But yeah, all great points, David. I mean, you hit a couple really good things there. Doing your due diligence, leveraging. One of the things I say about when it comes to demos, you mentioned demos, take the demo, set some time aside, set 2 hours aside at least twice throughout 2 weeks or a month or whatever you have. Set 2 hours aside where you play with it. It depends on your attention span. I'm pretty, once I get into something, I'm probably good for a period of time as long as I'm not interrupted. But give yourself enough time to play with it. If it's not relatively intuitive to you, don't go with it.
Yeah.
Now, I say that, and if you're not really intuitive with any kind of technology, then that's probably not good advice. But
there are those people.
Yeah. But generally speaking, if you're, decently okay with technology and you start playing around with it and it's not relatively intuitive, it probably won't be for others either.
Right.
But great advice on having other people try it. But what I've experienced for me, particularly when it comes to like accounting software, because of some of my background in that area. So if I start playing with it and it doesn't come to me naturally, I'm like, ooh, I don't know. This is going to be too hard. It's going to be too hard for me to adapt. I won't adapt and use it, right? I mean, I'm no different than anybody else. It's just easier for me to see it because I've lived through these scenarios. But at one point, I had a leads business, David. You remember that? And it seemed, it was a good business. I acquired it, made some decent money off it. But at the end of the day, the reality was it was so not tech. In what you would think would be a tech world, right? It was so removed from being tech savvy. And consequently, getting in and using the software was so counterintuitive. It made zero sense and super frustrating. So, and we ended up shutting the business down because it just didn't make sense anymore. It wasn't, it couldn't be competitive with the amount of time and energy it took to do what we needed to do. So, like I said, all great points. And I think those are things that people need to be thinking about, as we're talking, David, and this is just coming to me as we're conducting the show. We should probably figure out how we can drop that link for our clients so they can see that information, or a link or somehow we could share those takeaways for them.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because I think it's a good assessment of what you put together, and we can share those notes with people if they weren't able to capture it during the conversation. If we can start using maybe some bullet points we can share with them.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. At a minimum, I'll put it in the YouTube notes underneath the video. But yeah, let's find a better spot going forward. Great call.
Perfect. Yeah.
Awesome. Always looking out for our community. Love
That's
that.
right. That's right.
Cool. Well, hey, we're kind of wrapping up here, Eric. Anything new or noteworthy over at My Biz Coaches you want to spotlight for our audience today?
Yeah, appreciate that. I'm hoping that we're about 6 weeks out from a big convention We're going to do a goal setting. I say goal setting. It's really more business planning. You're planning your business for the next year. But my background with the Success with Goals, the book that I wrote. So we're doing a goal setting time management event for business owners. It's our primary target audience. Certainly anybody's invited. But that's on February 28th and March 1st. A 2-day event on Tuesday and Wednesday here in Phoenix, Arizona. Actually, I'll be in Chandler, Arizona. But we're excited to be able to produce this. My Biz Coaches will be hosting. I'll be speaking at the event on a number of occasions, and have a couple of other speakers that we're bringing in. I got a gentleman coming from Florida that talks about mindset and managing your state. He helps with breathing exercises and things like that to help manage stress, which I could probably use I could benefit from. He's actually pretty amazing. I met him at a mastermind last fall, and I was complaining about my knee. It was rainy and cold at that time. And my knee was stiff, and he did some exercises with me and breathing exercises with me, and did some work. And I was like, wow, my knee feels awesome. That was pretty cool. So I've come to appreciate his work, and we're spending some more time together. But we're going to co-promote an event, like I said, the 28th and 1st, February 8th and March 1st of this year. We figure it's perfect timing. Generally speaking, you'd want to do something this is the beginning of the year, get people started. My philosophy, either you do it before the year so you have the plan ready to go and execute on, or in our particular case, we're waiting for people to realize that their New Year's resolutions weren't working. They've already given up on them, and we're giving them an opportunity to get a restart and still take advantage of the 10 months that are left. So.
Is that then a re-resolution? Is that what that is?
I think you just gave me a marketing ploy that I can incorporate.
Hey, there you go. Yeah, happy to help.
Your 2023, awesome, really cool. Your 2023 re-resolution. I love it.
Nice. Well, that's awesome. If people want to learn more about that, where can they go?
We have the page going up on My Biz Coaches here in just a few days, so probably be available next week. We'll talk about it again next week, but yeah, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to info@mybizcoaches.com. Yeah, you can give information.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, that's exciting. Good stuff, Eric.
Appreciate it.
And if you guys want to learn more, just head over to mybizcoaches.com. Eric's got a lot of great resources, a lot of awesome coaches, and growing his coaching staff, I dare say, every month. So even more people to help entrepreneurs and small businesses out there. So
absolutely. Cool. Aggressive goal to add 20 more coaches this year.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a lot more people you can help. So very cool.
Exactly.
Well, hey, if you're interested in learning more about training, how you can improve learning within your organization, or just looking to up-level some of your skills or the skills of your employees, we have a lot of training available over on trainleadgrow.com. That's the home for the TLG group. Everything from leadership to sales to time management, and we can even help you with some of the automation stuff as well. So head over to trainleadgrow.com. You can also connect with us on social media, just @trainleadgrow on pretty much every social site, including, that's a big one, Eric, you've talked me into it.
You made the leap.
Yep, we're on TikTok at Train Lead Grow. I was reluctant, but Eric kind of pushed me into it. So appreciate the coaching and direction, Eric. It's awesome.
It was a pretty hefty nudge, but no problem, man. I'm there for you.
So some people are laggards right on the adoption curve, so that's me.
You're really far behind on that adoption bell curve, man.
But we're there. So connect with us. And of course, don't forget to like and more importantly, subscribe. More than anything, we want to make sure you don't miss future episodes. We talk a lot of interesting topics and really try to see what's trending in the world of business and try to help entrepreneurs really get that edge they need to succeed. So with that, be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time on the Biz Coach. So see you later.
Awesome. Thanks, David.